Welcome to Pondering the Orb. I'm your host, the wandering fantasy author Jay Record, and this is the show for Riffs, Synths, and fantasy books. Remember to subscribe, and let's start the quest. While we know Tolkien for The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and The Silmarillion, what is often overlooked are the vast amount of stories, finished and unfinished, that we sometimes neglect for the vast epics he wrought so long ago. Such as the Children of Hurin, which is Tolkien's wonderful and dark, some might even say grimdark, take on his classic setting of Middle-earth. Combining his love of German myths like the Song of the Nibelungs and the Volsung saga, arose from them came the tale of the House of Hurin, mortal enemies of Morgoth, and the source of a great curse that follows his children. Told in dark and tragic shades, Tolkien masterfully put together an epic that is still greatly underappreciated. Reading from The Children of Hurin, this is by J.R.R. Tolkien. The Children of Hurin, by J.R.R. Tolkien. Chapter 1. The Childhood of Turin. Hador Goldenhand was lord of the Edain, and well beloved by the Eldar. He dwelt while his days lasted under the lordship of Fingolfin, who gave him wide lands in the region of Hithlum, which was called Dor-lomin. His daughter Glorithel wedded Haldir, son of Halmir, lord of the men of Brethil, and at the same feast his son Galdor the Tall wedded Harith, the daughter of Halmir. Galdor and Harith had 2 sons, Hurin and Huror. Hurin was by 3 years the elder, but he was shorter in stature than other men of his kin. In this he took after his mother's people, but in all else he was like Hador, his grandfather, strong in body and fiery of mood. But the fire in him burned steadily, and he had great endurance of will. Of all the men in the north he knew most of the counsels of the Noldor. Hur, his brother, was tall, the tallest of the Edain save his own son Tuor only, and a swift runner. But if the race were long and hard, Hurin would be the first home, for he ran as strongly at the end of the course as at the beginning. There was great love between the brothers, and they were seldom apart in their youth. Hurin wedded Morwen, the daughter of Baragun, son of Bregulus of the house of Beor, and she was thus of close kin to Baron One Hand. Morwen was dark-haired and tall, and for the light of her glance and the beauty of her face men called her Eldwin, the Elven fair, but she was somewhat stern of mood and proud. The sorrows of the house of Beor saddened her heart, for she came as an exile to Dor-lomin from the Dorthonion after the ruin of Bragolak. Turin was the name of the eldest child of Hurin and Morwen, and he was born in that year in which Beren came to Doriath and found Luthien Tinuvil, Thingol's daughter. Morwen bore a daughter also to Hurin, and she was named Erwin, but she was called Lelith, which is laughter, by all that knew her in her short life. Hurur wedded Rian, the cousin of Morwen. She was the daughter of Belagun, son of Bregulas. By hard fate was she born into such days, for she was of gentle heart and loved neither hunting nor war. Her love was given to trees and to the flowers of the wild, and she was a singer and a maker of songs. 2 months only had she been wedded to Hur when he went with his brother to Nirnaeth Arnodiad, and she never saw him again. But now the tale returns to Hurin and Hur in the days of their youth. It is said for a while that the sons of Galdor dwelt in Brethil, as foster sons of Haldor, their uncle, after the custom of northern men in those days. They often went to battle with the men of Brethil against the orcs, who now harried the northern borders of their land. For Hurin, though only 17 years of age, was strong, and Hur, the younger, was already as tall as most full-grown men of that people. On a time Hurin and Hur went with a company of scouts, but they were ambushed by the orcs and scattered, and the brothers were pursued to the ford of Brithiek. There they would have been taken or slain but for the power of Ulmo that was still strong in the waters of Sirion, and it is said that a mist arose from the river and hid them from their enemies, and they escaped over the Brithiek into Dimbar. There they wandered in great hardship among the hills beneath the sheer walls of the Chrysogrim, until they were bewildered in the deceits of that land, and knew not the way to go on or to return. There Thorondor espied them, and he sent 2 of his eagles to their aid. And the eagles bore them up and brought them beyond the encircling mountains to the secret vale of Tumladen and the hidden city of Gondolin, which no man had yet seen. There Turgon the king received them well, when he learned of their kin, for Hador was an elf friend, and Ulmor, moreover, had counselled Turgon to deal kindly with the sons of that house, for whom help should come to him at need. Hurin and Hur dwelt as guests in the king's house for well nigh a year, and it is said in this time Hurin, whose mind was swift and eager, gained much lore of the elves, and learned also something of the counsels and purposes of the king. For Turgon took great liking to the sons of Galdor, and spoke much with them, and he wished indeed to keep them in Gondolin out of love, and not only for his law that no stranger, be he elf or man, who found his way to the secret kingdom or looked upon the city should ever depart again, until the king should open the leaguer, and the hidden people should come forth. But Hurin and Hor desired to return to their own people, and share in the wars and griefs that now beset them. And Hurin said to Turgon, Lord, we are but mortal men, and unlike the Eldar. They may endure long years awaiting battle with their enemies in some far distant day, but for us the time is short, and our hope and strength soon wither. Moreover, we did not find the road to Gondolin, and indeed we do not know surely where this city stands, for we were brought in fear and wonder by the highways of the air, and in mercy our eyes were veiled. Then Turgon granted his prayer, and he said, By the way you came you have leave to return, if Thorondar is willing. I grieve at this parting, yet in a little while, as the Eldar account it, we may meet again. But Maeglin, the king's sister-son, who was mighty in Gondolin, grieved not at all at their going, though he begrudged them the favour of the king, for he had no love for any kindred of men, and he said to Hurin, The king's grace is greater than you know, and some might wonder wherefore the strict law is abated for two knave children of men. It would be safer if they had no choice but to abide here as our servants to their life's end. The king's grace is great indeed, answered Hurin, but if our word is not enough, then we swear oaths to you. And the brothers swore to never reveal the counsels of Turgon, and to keep secret all they had seen in his realm. Then they took their leave, and the eagles coming bore them away by night, and set them down in Dorloman before the dawn. Their kinsfolk rejoiced to see them, for messengers from Brethil had reported they were lost. But they would not tell even to their father where they had been, save that they were rescued in the wilderness by the eagles who had brought them home. But Galdor said, Did you then dwell a year in the wild? Or did the eagles house you in their eyries? But you found food and fine raiment, and returned as young princes, not as waifs of the wood. Be content, father, said Hurin, that we have returned, for only under oath of silence was this permitted. That oath is still on us. Then Galdor questioned them no more, but he and many others guessed at the truth, for both the oath of silence and the eagles pointed to Turgon. So the days passed, and the shadow of the fear of Morgoth lengthened. But in the 469th year after the return of the Noldor to Middle-earth, there was a stirring of hope among the elves and men. For the rumor ran among them of the deeds of Beren and Luthien, and the putting the shame of Morgoth even upon his throne in Agband. And some said that Beren and Luthien yet lived, or had returned from the dead. In that year also the great councils of Maedhros were also complete, and with the reviving strength of the Eldar and the Edain, the advance of Morgoth was stayed, and the orcs were driven back from Beleriand. Then some began to speak of victories to come, and of the redressing of the battle of Bragollach, when Maedhros should lead forth the united hosts, and drive Morgoth underground, and seal the doors of Angband. But the wiser were uneasy still, fearing that Maedhros revealed his growing strength too soon, and that Morgoth would be given time to take counsel against him. Ever will some new evil be hatched in Angband beyond the guess of elves and men, they said. And in the autumn of that year, to point their words, came an ill wind from the north under leaden skies. The evil breath it was called, for it was pestilent, and many sickened and died in the fall of the year in the northern lands that bordered on the Angfoglith, and they were for the most part the children, or the rising youth in the houses of men. When Verlin du Talor, the last princess of a tyrannical line, is forced to don a holy suit of armor and a demon-possessed crown to free her land from a cruel prince and the petty alliances that brought down her father, she must contend with them and the growing darkness inside. She must fight the demon within, hungry to devour her soul. The first novel in the Song of the Scourgelands series, Bringer of the Scourge is a dynamic and dark epic fantasy that is a must-have for modern readers and fans of classic sword and sorcery like Red Sonja and Jiriel Jory. McDowell has a wonderful prose style and vivid characters, and I have to say I really love this book. Reading from M. Daniel McDowell's 2023 release, this is Bringer of the Scourge. Bringer of the Scourge by M. Daniel McDowell. Chapter 1. The End. Virulin awoke to the smell of fire in the crisp night air. Not the soft kind of fire that lit the hearth. This was something bigger, wilder, a fire wicked and unnatural, with a tarry note of grease that ran behind it, and a sharp undertone of burnt hair. On peering through the single southward-facing window in her parapet cell, it was clear. A building blazed in the village beyond the gates of Castle Tolor. No, it was 2, 3, a dozen. Fabric, thatch, and beams all alight in the darkness, crackling with deliberate violence. The sudden explosions that accompanied this great and growing conflagration served to add more terror into the air. The screams of the townsfolk in panic could be heard even at this distance, and Vi cursed as she watched the heart of this fire advance rapidly towards the siege gates of the castle itself. Would anyone come to her aid, up here in her lonely tower, if the fire spread up from Tinvale? She shook off the mantle of fitful sleep as best as she was able, laying aside her terrible reoccurring dream about a disfigured boy with the eye of a demon, its piercing green gaze fixed on her, across an endless river of darkness that churned swiftly between them. As she set herself into motion, she put on her only shoes, a threadbare pair of thin-soled black slippers, one of the bitter hallmarks of her interminable internment. From where she stood, she was still unable to do anything but prepare and hope. The words of the prophecy that had dragged behind her like an anchor all of her life now rang with force within her. That jeweled tower of her broken heart can only stand forth as righteous so long as the flower of hope remains, rose in the tower eternal. Else that flower of hope becomes crown of all ruination. What dire nonsense. If Tolor could fall, it would, and she had known this since her youth, even as her paranoid father claimed he would prevent it by stuffing her into this fretful tower, hoping to forestall the inevitable. The walls of this castle were built on the shifting sands of fate, and Brababinghar, warlord and holder of Deribor, would be its last king. Not because of this fool prophecy, but because he was at once cruel and dull, shaped by a long time caring for nothing but his own wants, and his many and varied wants had brought even greater suffering, as her tutor often told her, in whispers between her other lessons. Virulin knew enough of that cruelty itself, though she had seldom seen her father in the 15 years of her imprisonment. She had spent more years in that tower than she had in the light of the sun, at 27. Decades of his unchecked tyranny had wrought much suffering in all of his vassal states, and now it was visited upon Castle Tolor in kind. She had heard as much, in whispers, in idle chatter no one thought her attentive enough to hear, that now the collective power of the merchant principalities was taking its vengeance. In the eye of chaos, in the fall of the great empire, will be reborn the crown of the world unbound, the voice of unspoken ages anew, awaiting the return of the sundered throne. It was his own fool deeds that had brought them to this place, but as it had always been, the last princess would bear the blame for her father's descent into ruin, all because some drunken sod with his own sectarian religion believed it in the sacred truth of his dark imaginings. The baseless belief that every castle in Deribor, every kingdom in the known lands would fall one day to bloodshed, and all because of one lousy girl. It was worse than ludicrous in retrospect. She wondered if it was worse to know the folly of the prophecies. It had been the king's own decision to bring her a teacher, someone who knew the world far outside these towers, and whose instruction had only honed her long resentment of her seeming fate. She had learned only that the castle held nothing for her, despite her aching wish. In the firelight, down the hill, the vague shapes of riders on horseback bore torches and siege equipment, bound for the walls of the castle below. No time. If there was to be any change, any alteration to the star-sworn testimony, it would be by her hand. If If she found her mother's crown and ran for Stonebrick now, there was still a chance she could set things right and escape this miserable tower once and for all. Better world she could live with, if only her luck held long enough. If only she was fortunate enough to flee at all, for that matter. The moment she anticipated for 15 terrible years had descended upon them all at last. Only by oblation of the shepherd in shadow. She tried to remember the rest of the words. She didn't believe in any of it, but it had haunted her for so long. The Bringer of the Scourge, the crown of the world unbound. All of it strange, unhelpful in the face of the oncoming blaze. Only by the oblation of the shepherd in the shadow will the Bringer of the Scourge free the crown of the world unbound. It didn't matter anymore, did it? As she shed the rest of her night clothes and cursed the ever-encroaching darkness, Verilyn Due to Lore readied herself for the battle that had finally reached her door. She donned her training clothes, a gambeson and some other padded armor, then reached for the training sword Carice had brought her. Carice! Where was she? The clamor of panic and the clashing blades in the yards below filled V with an acute terror as waves of riders breached the siege gates. She steadied her mind, as she had been taught by her curious mentor, slightly mouthing the words that accompanied the meditation of the blade. I control only my response. I control only my breath. I control only my destiny. She suspected the destiny bit was her tutor and sword mistress's way of critiquing the same prophecy that had bound her into the princess's circle, teaching and training her in secret, between lessons in music and histories known only to the folk of the unconquerable plains. It was reassuring that the bardic woman from the distant steppes innately understood the preposterous nature of Verilyn's circumstances and regarded it with the same skepticism. V slipped the pocket bag from her day dress into the only gown that fit over her thin selection of armaments, the night dark blue velvet masking her sturdy curves. Her tatting shuttle in a spool of black silken thread, a handful of rare gems loosed from their settings by vigilant, hidden picking, a signet ring with a crest she dared not allow anyone to see upon her finger, for it was a token of a shattered time. All of these disappeared into those confines. The shrill whinnies of spooked horses and the harried cries of night guardsmen in the courtyards below sharpened her resolve. Maybe they've forgotten me. It was not a wish, but it sounded like one, spoken aloud. The burning odor accompanied the ozone of illicit mage thunder from the ramparts. No way to tell which side had fired off such wicked spells. She threw herself at the locked door, anxious to be found before the unholy fire crept up the ivory trellises, equally anxious not to be apprehended by her father's guards if she sought escape. She drove her weight against it, shouting for Carice, for anyone who would hear, but it held fast despite her every effort. Wild violet-blue flames erupted in the sky above her window, and a foul alchemical scent flooded the room. She screamed for help, for mercy, her shoulder against the door frame as she bellowed herself hoarse and pounded the latches with her fist, trying to be heard over the din of the suffering below. Damn them all, the superstitious and the gullible and the complicit, every single one of them, the ones who believed her only place in this world was this singular cell. Overcome with a terrible shuddering sensation as the air grew thin, she collapsed, heaving dry, gasping for breath. An overpowering drowsiness came over her, as she thought she heard the faintest sound of her dearest mentor and friend, just outside the door, but she could not make out the words. Our first Polish melodic death metal band to appear on the show, I'd like to introduce Moira. Founded in 2017, this band constructs sharp, thunderous melodeath combining elements of other genres, but for fans of bands like Arch Enemy and some old-school dark tranquility, this is a fun debut to go and find. Playing Rage of the Sky, featured on their first full-length LP, Omen, released in 2023, this is Moira. A legend on the scene from Portland, Oregon, it is hard to find a playlist or soundtrack involving synthwave these days not involving this next name. Hotel Pools is a dynamic player that values the sonic aesthetic of the genre, willing to experiment with its bounds while staying true to its roots. The album we're sampling from, Baked, is legitimately one of the top 3 releases of 2021 and one of my absolute favorites. Taken from 2021's Baked, this is Hydro by Hotel Pools. That's the show. Remember to check out all the books, music, and subscribe below. See you next time, and safe journeys.